Liverpool Street Station in London. Just before the Second World War broke out, 8 trains arrived here from Prague, carrying nearly 700 Jewish children, saved from the Nazis by a man who kept his achievement secret for 50 years. The man is Nicholas Winton. The children he saved now call themselves Winton's children. This is their story.
If I half close my eyes, I can see my mother standing there with a friend of hers, and a German soldier with a swastika on his arm standing on the platform, and lots of anxious parents.
I didn't cry. My sister, I imagine, must have. I mean, she was 3. And the station, it was dead of night, pitch dark, and there was absolute silence.
My parents weren't allowed on the platform. They had to stand behind barriers.
Without him, I wouldn't be sitting here, and I know that very well.
How did this man manage to save a generation of Czech children? How did the children themselves survive their incredible journey? We're on our way to Nicholas Winton's home, where he lives now, age 93, in the heart of the English countryside. I first met him 15 years ago, when his story was completely unknown. Only this month has he finally been honoured with a knighthood for rescuing the children from certain death. We remember our war heroes, the generals, the fighting soldiers, but there is another, quieter kind of hero.
Imagine someone at the age of, I think he was 27 or 28, whom you would today call a yuppie. Someone working in the city, making lots and lots of money, which he probably did, and saying goodbye to it.
I want to discover why Nicholas Winton worked day and night to save as many children as possible at a time when few other people recognized the urgency or the danger.
This sort of commitment which he had to this, it must be totally rare. I mean, there are lots of people who are inclined to do good things, but to do them on that sort of scale and to have the initiative to do it on your own, that's something unique.
How could you have just done such a fantastic thing and just shrug it off? Well, I was there, there was a job to be done, I did it, then I got on with the next job. How could a person do so much and say so little?
He saved 669 children, working until the day war broke out. Then he put their papers, their photographs, the permits he forged to get them out of Prague, into a case where they lay in his attic for 50 years. He told nobody what he'd done, not even his wife and family. Then in 1988, he contacted me on the television program That's Life and asked us to try and trace the children so that their documents could be returned to them. Until then, no one had known his secret or understood how he could have smuggled so many children out of the Nazis' grasp. And these are the children you saved?
Yes. There were 5 committees in Czechoslovakia who were looking after all these refugees. One heard from all these committees that they were trying to help the endangered elder people, but there were all these children that nobody could do anything for. And I said, well, why doesn't somebody do something? And the chief answer was, well, they wouldn't let them into England anyway.
You make it absolutely clear that it's urgent, that these children can't be allowed to stay in Prague because they're going to suffer something terrible.
Yes, but our urgency was not because of the situation as it was. It was the situation as we were convinced it was going to be, and that is that there was going to be a war.
And yet in 1938, when Hitler was allowed to march into Sudetenland, a part of Czechoslovakia on the border with Germany, he'd promised there would be no war. He was greeted with joy by the Germans who lived there, but with despair by the Czechs, who knew they'd been betrayed. Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, called it a quarrel in a faraway country between people we know nothing about, and promised peace in our time. Nicholas Winton, a 29-year-old stockbroker, had been planning a skiing holiday in Switzerland. Instead, a friend persuaded him to come to Prague, and there he saw the refugees who'd escaped from Hitler's Sudetenland. They were living in makeshift camps, and most of them were Jews.
They were really kind of expelled from Sudetenland, and a large number of them had nowhere to go, and they were just put in Nissen huts.
Were you shocked by what you saw?
Well, the Nissen huts in the height of winter with a lot of snow on the ground were pretty miserable places to be in.
How could he possibly help in just 3 weeks? He couldn't take on the Nazis' fighting machine alone, but perhaps there was another way. Could he find foster families in Britain and save a handful of Czech children that way? He resolved to try.
We were the fortunate ones. Well, we are the fortunate ones now. Because without him, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. And I know that very well.
One of those children was Rudi Vesely. A 77-year-old retired university lecturer, he was 14 when he left Prague. Now we're taking him on a journey with his wife Wendy back to Prague.
I'm glad we're going on the train now, because trains, and not just trains, railway lines, have a symbolic function. Trains, if you see a picture of any concentration camp, you'll see single railway lines.
And for 15,000 Czech children and their families, these tracks were to lead east to Auschwitz, and a horror nobody yet could dream of. But already by the end of 1938, the comfortable, tolerant Czechoslovakia they'd known was changing fast.
Things were getting worse and worse, and the whole atmosphere became very threatening.
I knew that Hitler wanted to kill all the Jews. I understood he was a bad man who didn't like Jews. And the old relatives were very frightened already and were huddled, talking in whispers, very, very frightened.
In March 1939, Germany invaded and occupied Prague. Hitler announced that Czechoslovakia was officially part of the Reich. Europe watched and waited while the noose tightened.
When the Germans invaded Prague, I was 6 years old by then, one of the first things that happened was we had to tear the picture of President Beneš out of our school books and get a picture of Hitler. So my mother, she told me later, she'd gone around Prague looking for the cheapest picture of Hitler she could find, which was a gaudy sort of postcard which was stuck in. All the other children had more expensive pictures of Hitler.
One was not actually surprised when the Germans marched in. And I watched this, and it was a very rainy day, it was a sort of sleety, horrendous. But it wasn't surprising.
What 6-year-old boy isn't sort of thrilled by seeing the soldiers, the infantry? You know, it was being torn both ways. It was obviously exciting, but also threatening.
I went to town that day, went to school, but we were dismissed. And I went to my father's bank to see my father straight away, which wasn't far away. And the man at the door, who knew me well, just said to me, "Well, Sonny, no use you coming here, your father doesn't work here anymore."
It's extraordinary it happened that quickly.
That was within a few hours of the occupation.
Hitler just appeared on the balcony, waved to the crowd, and the crowd shouted, "Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer." One folk, one empire, one leader. And they were going at it all the time. And then I made my way home, and when I got home, I told my mother where I was, what I'd seen. She got hold of a wooden spoon and beat me.
Because?
Because I shouldn't have risked it.
Nazi anti-Semitism was spreading from Germany to Czechoslovakia as fast as any plague, and just as lethal. The smallest drop of Jewish blood became a taint.
I've one other memory of having a romp with my father, and I hit my head on a central heating radiator and started crying, and he started tickling me again. so I hit my head even harder and gushed here. And I had to go to the doctor. And I'm sure this is true, although it's just in my memory. The doctor took one look at it and said, that needs a stitch, but I don't stitch Jews, and put plaster on. And so I've got a scar there.
My father was arrested as soon as the Germans came into Czechoslovakia, and my mother and grandmother kept me home from school because they didn't know what was happening. And the next day I went to school, and the teacher, who I'd been very fond of and very happy in the class, said something about the Jews running away. I'd suddenly been labelled. I was the Jews. I wasn't Vera anymore. And that was the dreadful feeling, that I'd stopped being just an individual child.
The hotel where Nicholas stayed in Prague has hardly changed. He spent his whole holiday working against the clock. As word spread that here was a possible escape route, dozens, then hundreds of desperate parents begged for help. Here, in this hotel room, he began to create lists of children, then wrote letters to governments and sponsors, trying to alert them to the urgency. America and Australia turned him down. Would Britain fail him too?
I work on the principle that if something is not impossible, there must be a way of doing it. And in fact, that was the least problem. There was no problem in getting them into England. I mean, the Home Office said, yes, if you want to bring children into England, bring them in. It's just a lot of hard work, that's all.
Tell me about the hard work.
Well, the hard work was getting a very small committee to help me and to get people to come forward to take the children.
And who was that committee?
Well, I was the committee. Well, I mean, the only satisfactory committee is the committee of one. And the British committee, who said that they couldn't do anything for me, I just used their name but called myself Children's Section, so that was all right. Because eventually, after a few months, they had to accept me as legal.
And you gave yourself a title?
Oh, well, I made myself Honorary Secretary. Not a very imposing title, but you had to sign yourself as something.
After 3 weeks, Nicholas Winton had to return home to England and continue his work there. The question was, how would the children be able to follow him to safety? And would they be able to get out in time? Back in England, Nicholas Winton returned to his job in the city. He'd wanted to stay longer in Prague, but his boss felt stocks and shares were more important than Hitler and the fate of the children. So he worked every evening, searching for families to take the children and raising £50 per child. Without it, they wouldn't be allowed into the country. How did you do it?
Well, I had the picture post, which was quite a power in the land of those days. They ran a letter from me in all their issues. The letter just said that these children in Prague were in danger, that we needed families who would look after them until the emergency was over, and that we also needed £50 as well.
How did they choose the child?
Well, we did a very unorthodox thing merely to speed things up. If somebody wanted a girl of 7 or 8, we made a postcard with 6 photos of children of 7 or 8 and asked them to choose a child, which worked very quickly, actually. Not a very nice way of doing it, really, in retrospect. But it wasn't time for anything else.
What do you pack for a child you may never see again?
This is one of 2 suitcases that we packed. My mother and I packed them together. This was the allowance, just 2 cases. And she put all the family linens into one case, all the lovely embroidered cloths that her mother had done, all the monogrammed sheets and pillowcases she had from her wedding. And then I had a separate case with my books and toys and clothes, and I had the choice of what toys to take, which was very difficult, and I always felt I chose the wrong things because the choice was so hard.
How old were you?
6.5.
It was just amazing what my mother packed, and I was so stupid that I didn't realize that there were sort of clothes that were fitting me, and then they were a little bigger, and then there were some yet even bigger.
My knowledge of England was minimal. I read Little Lord Fauntleroy.
So you knew to expect earls in their castles?
Precisely. And I imagined I would be going to some stately home. And certainly, if you saw what they dressed me up in, I arrived wearing +4s. Well, everybody knew that in England you wore +4s.
Prague station. For 6 months, on 8 different trains, Winton's children left at midnight from these platforms. Their parents tried in different ways to disguise their own pain and their fear.
My mother and my grandparents came to the station, and whether it's real or whether it's just a memory of it being night and the hissing of the train and being put on the train, but I was always a very adventurous child, and I didn't cry. My sister, I imagine, must have. I mean, she was 3, and I look at my children, my grandchildren now, thinking, would I put them on a train?
There was no goodbye at Prague station because my parents didn't come. It was my father's secretary who took me to the station. I think they didn't want to make one of these tragic scenes of it.
My whole family was there, and the station, it was dead of night, pitch dark, bright lights overhead, and there was absolute silence, just total silence in the whole station. And I looked out at my relatives, and then the train went.
I can remember Prague station and the awful feeling that my parents weren't allowed on the platform. They had to stand behind barriers, and I remember this train with lots of children, and we were all looking out of the window, and I could see my parents' white handkerchiefs waving.
The fact that I half closed my eyes, I can see my mother standing there with a friend of hers, and a German soldier with a swastika on his arm standing on the platform, and lots of anxious parents.
I was excited. I was going on an adventure. I remember waving a white handkerchief from the train. It must have been a dreadful situation for them. It wasn't for me.
Tell me what you saw.
Well, there were crowds of parents outside, and as the train moved out, we on the train produced our hankies and waved to them, and so did they. I remember that, yes.
And that was the last you saw? That was the last you saw?
The train journey was a quiet affair. We were very subdued because I think the doors were sealed and there were some Germans around when we were boarding, and obviously we were trying to be quiet and non-provocative. We knew what it was about.
The Quaker ladies who came up to me and said, "You are one of the oldest. You can be in charge of these 4 little ones." These children who were all less than 5 years old were crying continuously from the moment we got onto the train.
The train stopped in Dresden station and our carriage by the side of the station restaurant or buffet. And on the door or window of that restaurant I saw a sign saying, "Juden Eintritt unerwünscht. Jews not welcome here." And it hit me. As soon as we were in Holland, I do remember we all sung the Czech national anthem.
Suddenly ladies came in and smiled at us and gave us cocoa. So we knew we were in a different world. And one thing I do remember, strangely enough, that impressed me was seeing black and white cows for the first time in my life. Until then I'd never seen a black and white cow. They were all brown and white.
And I ate nothing. My mother had... I get quite emotional, sorry. That's why I don't like talking about it. And my mother had given me a sort of some food, and I hadn't touched it.
We went through Holland to the Hook of Holland, what seemed to us a huge ship. We boarded a ferry for Harwich. In the morning we woke up, we were given tea with milk, which I hated, and a horrible railway-type sandwich. Actually, the boat, I believe, belonged to the LNER Railway Company. And there was, I think, a banana sandwich, which was a little stale. And I thought, oh dear, if we're going to get fed like this in England, then I'm not sure I want to go there.
The next thing I knew was waking up in the morning, going up on deck, and for the first time seeing the sea and seeing seagulls. I do remember that. I've never seen a seagull before. White birds.
And looking out after the crossing, when we got to England, the green of the green, which is quite different to our green at home. There's an intense colour of the grass that really impressed me. Liverpool Street was the greatest impression of it all, because having seen the railway stations in Prague and so on, which were tiny in comparison, there was this enormous black edifice, like a sort of hellhole, which was, I think, which marked me artistically for life, because I've been drawing railway stations ever since. And I couldn't get enough of looking at this place.
I have a memory of being on Liverpool Street Station with a label round my neck and of sitting there and thinking there's a language going on of which I don't understand a single word, and nobody's going to come and collect me.
Did you go and meet them ever?
I met every transport, yes. Absolute chaos.
Was it?
Well, imagine 250 children coming off the train with labels round their necks, and a whole lot of parents, people who were going to look after them, coming to collect them. Then you had to get the right child to the right person. As near as one can get to complete chaos, I think.
And the next step they were about to take was just as alarming and unpredictable.
I couldn't understand a word of English, and it was just before my 11th birthday, and she greeted me with a smile and tears in her eyes, and she put her arms around me, and her first words were, "You shall be loved."
As the news spread that hundreds of Winton's children were arriving safely in England, more and more Czech parents made the desperate choice to send their children away to complete strangers in a foreign land and to an unknown fate.
We went into a large hall with benches, and people came to fetch us.
Who came to fetch you?
Nobody. This was a surprising thing. I just sat there, and nobody came. So when I think only 3 of us were left, a young lady came. She was a teacher from Essex, a young teacher, and she said something like, "Well, you 3 boys obviously haven't got anywhere to go to, so I'll take you and place you with my friends.
Here in Rugby, a small religious group called the Christadelphians created a hostel for the Jewish boys nobody else wanted. This is a film they took of the boys. It's never been seen on television before, and it reveals that orphaned and uprooted as they were, the boys flourished here. The Christadelphians looked after them well, and the children themselves were determined to survive. They learned English quickly and did well at school. Their memories of this time are good.
It was a semi-detached house, and there were about 8, 10, 12 of us. The number varied. All very simple. Our clothes were hanging on the picture rails in the bedroom. There wasn't much heating or anything, but we were well nourished, and we were sort of a happy company, lots of fun, lots of mischief.
In his search for families for the children still trapped in Czechoslovakia, Nicholas Winton contacted the Christadelphians. Their leader, Alan Overton, made speeches around the country trying to find homes for the children. His son Bruce Overton has found in his father's papers a box of undiscovered documents dating from the 30s, photographs of children whose hopes were to be dashed with the outbreak of war, and letters begging for help, which reveal the viciousness of the Nazi persecution. My father is a Jew, so he must write, "I am a Jew" on the window of his home each day, where he's trying to carry out wireless repair work. He must add also in his own handwriting, "Only pigs deal here." He may be able to offer some suggestion which may yet enable him to come to England and so escape a probable living death in a German concentration camp.
Of course, at the time, they hadn't realised how serious were the concentration camps, that their lives were, well, they wouldn't live very long. In any case, in the concentration camps, and the idea of Hitler's mob were to destroy them, really, not to. They were told that they were going to labour camps and so on, but we know the result.
You've got letters here relating to Nicholas Winton.
Yes,
because he spent night after night trying desperately to find families who would take the children. I wonder whether these are children he couldn't place. Look at these children's faces. This is Carl Singer, born in 1923, and talks about his father and mother. These are tragic faces. Oh. These must all have been sent out by Nicholas Winton, desperately looking for homes for the children. Yes. Look at this lovely child.
Look at the photograph underneath.
Photograph underneath this
You can
one.
get at it.
Oh, look!
And that gives you some idea. There's a baby, and many babies came. Their parents let them go. Why?
Because they knew what was happening.
Mm. They knew that if life was to continue, they must say goodbye to them.
What's in this bag?
Some of the labels that they actually were wearing when they arrived in England. And
with the name?
The names on.
518. 6778. Walter Fiedelhaar, age 3.
Dreadful.
Winton's hard work had this reward. The children lived and grew up to become poets and politicians, teachers and doctors. Some of them found loving foster homes. Some were less lucky, but all of them survived. 5,000 people are now alive, thanks to him. Alf Dubs, the MP who became a lord, takes a special interest in asylum seekers. Another of Winton's children became a vicar.
I was welcomed with a very warm welcome, very open-armed welcome, and I knew it was good.
They were very unkind. They were very mean, and they didn't give me enough to eat. And I was very, very hungry, so I picked up some fruit from the lawn. And she had me in front of the children and said, "This is a thief."
It was a brothel, and they did employ a number of interesting young ladies. We assumed that they had some form of relationship with the guests, not with us. Oh, that was something else we hated. We had to sleep two in a bed, two boys in one bed, and that was quite a shock for us.
If I did cry, I cried sort of where they couldn't see me. I don't know why, I just must have been brought up not to cry in public or something, I don't know, but I just didn't do that.
So where did you go?
To the toilet.
My foster parents decided that I had to learn English quickly, so if I didn't ask in English, I didn't get. And so I learned English very quickly and forgot my German equally quickly. So by September, so that's 6 weeks after I came, I went to an English school. I don't remember any language problems. I remember Chamberlain's speech on September, was it 3rd, back then, saying that he'd been misled and declaration of war. I remember hearing that and understanding him.
On September the 3rd, 1939, war was declared. On that very day, a train loaded with 250 of Winton's children was standing in Prague station, waiting to leave. But the borders closed. The children were taken off the train and sent home. None of them survived the war. The Nazis sent all the Jews left in Prague to a ghetto they created in a nearby town, Terezin. Rudy Vesely and I discovered in the National Archive in Prague his father Karol's last postcard to an aunt before his family were deported.
Nezapomeňte na nás, don't forget us. Nepodáme se, we won't give in. And if our fate should be as we fear, don't forget us. And don't forget our boy, that's me. God bless you, yours, Karel.
Terezin had once been a peaceful little town of 5,000 people. Here the Nazis created an appalling ghetto. 140,000 Jews were sent here from all over Europe. And from here the railway lines led one way, east to Auschwitz. Although Rudy's family were sent to Terezin, he can't bear to go there and see it for himself. Rudy, why don't you want to come with us?
Because I'm afraid. I wasn't afraid coming to Prague, but at Terezin I'm very afraid.
So we made the journey to Terezin without him. The town itself is simple, quiet. It's become a place of pilgrimage. The ghosts of misery, starvation and overcrowding seem to have departed.
Do you know what life was like in Terezin? In the ghetto?
Well, it must have been pretty ghastly. There were 6 people in one room and another family on the landing.
How did they live? Could they work? Did they have money? How did they live?
My father was a judge, and I understand that my mother worked in the kitchen.
So she had access to food, at least?
Yes. And they had a sort of self-government in Terezin. And as a judge, he had to try minor offences, which became their major offences, punishable by death. Things like writing to people outside, bringing in food, because they had working parties going outside, bringing in some food. That was that was punishable by death. He refused to do that. He refused to sentence anybody to be killed because of that, and that's why he was arrested. There is a horrible prison there known as the Little Fortress, where Gestapo prisoners were taken, including my father. And I gather it was a very cruel place indeed. And I'm not sure, but I suspect that that is where my father was killed.
Over the centuries, many prisoners have died in this medieval fort, but nothing matched the Gestapo's death toll. Anyone who rebelled against their inhumanity, Jew or Christian, gypsy or dissident, was tortured here and killed. Many hundreds more died of typhus. The thousands of anonymous graves are visited by those who come here, as we did, to try and unlock the past. We came as mourners, but we were to discover that the cemetery in the little fortress at Terezin has another secret to reveal for Rudi Vesely. We came to Prague to search for traces of Rudi's family. Today, it's a beautiful city, filled with vitality and tourists. The famous facades have survived invasion, occupation, and revolution. The Jewish Museum in Prague carefully preserves every scrap of their legacy. And Rudi found here one last postcard from his father, sent from the little fortress.
This is the last message from my father. The postcard was sent to my aunt, who was not Jewish, and she sent it to me after the war.
What's it say?
Right, it says, political prison, Terezin, small fortress, cell number 3. He wrote to my aunt asking her, please send boots, gloves, which means he was working outside, any food, and send me 50 Czech crowns. My aunt sent it to him, but the postal order came back from Terezin, stamped nicht mehr hier, no longer here. And that was the last thing.
For children who've been torn away from their families and from their own past, the Jewish Museum and the National Archive may provide the answers they need: who they were, where they came from, and who in the past had loved and cared for them. Most crucial of all, what became of their families. Because the most extraordinary aspect of the Nazi regime wasn't simply their disregard for life, but their passion for order and precision. They recorded everything, and the records are here. For the first time, Rudi can trace his father's deportation, from Prague to the ghetto in Terezin, then from the ghetto to the little fortress, every step of the way.
A potom paláci Vltava.
So this is Karel Vesely, this is your
father.
And what's it say?
First transport to Terezin. Politisches Gefängnis. Nicht Polizei, politisches Gefängnis. Was ist unbekannt? Ursache. Reason for his arrest. Unbekannt. Unknown. Yes, but we know why.
Yes. And did he die in the small fort?
I don't know. Kde zemřel?
Would she have a record?
She's got a book where it may be, further information may be given. This is a Czech document. This is the local document, not the Gestapo document.
Tady je Veselý Karel a Veselá Augusta.
To je moje
Oba
matka.
dva a on zemřel v Osvětimi.
So now we know he was sent to Auschwitz.
A tady
That's
to
the
je...
first time I found out.
Ta policie ho vrátila zpátky do Terezína, když ho asi vyšetřili, tak oni jsou mezi zahynulými, až tady.
What is this?
What she's saying is that he was released from the small fortress, joined my mother in the final transport, and he was killed in Auschwitz.
So they were together?
They were together. I didn't know that.
And they're still together. Their names are written on the walls of the Pinkas synagogue, together with the 80,000 Czech Jews who were murdered. Names preserved, memories preserved, in the synagogue which is now a national memorial. Rudi and his wife Wendy found the names of some of the children Rudi had left behind, his friends and relatives, who'd all perished. And here, hand-painted on these walls, he found his father Karel and his mother Augustina.
if it hadn't been for Nicholas Winton, there would be a third Vesely.
Well, I know.
Yes.
Well, that's why we're all here. His questions have been answered now. He can lay them to rest. Now Rudy wants to make another link with his own past, to visit the flat he used to live in with his parents, the place where they'd spent their last day together.
So here you are, home again.
Yes. And I feel very happy to be here. There's nothing untoward happened here to me.
So what have you got, Rudy?
This.
These are the photographs his parents took on that last day, in June 1939, outside this flat. Rudy was 14. They let him go, their only child, with these pictures to remember them by. Then another child came to live here, his cousin Gertie. She too should have been a Winton's child. She was put on a train filled with 250 children. It should have left Prague station at midnight on September the 3rd, 1939. But that was the day war was declared, so the borders were sealed, and to his parents' despair, Gertie and all the other children were taken off the train.
That little girl, Gertie or Gertrude as she was called, went to Terezín with my parents and went to Auschwitz with my mother. And she was 12 years old.
We found Gertie's photograph in the museum in Prague. Also in the museum, I found a letter written by Gertie's cousin, who'd managed to escape to America. Rudy had never seen it before.
Gertie never had a chance in life. She was only 6 years old at the time of the Anschluss, only 12 when she was murdered. Nearly half her short life was spent in misery, mostly without her parents, interned in a concentration camp. Finally, a horrible death. The brutality and senselessness of all this still escapes me. The organised killing of innocent men, women and children during the middle of the 20th century represents one of the darkest chapters in human history. We've come so far in medicine, science and technology, but little progress has been made in our ability to get on with our fellow man. I often think of Gertie and her untimely demise, and on each anniversary of her death, I light a candle and say Kaddish, the traditional Jewish prayer for the dead. If not me, who will? For the grace of God, it could have been my fate.
Auschwitz. The families left behind in Czechoslovakia. The children Nicholas Winton couldn't rescue. Nearly all of them were killed here. In all, 2 million people died. Murder on a scale that still defies our understanding.
Can you find an explanation, Rudy?
You make second-class citizens of people. That's the first step. Deprive them of dignity, of rights, of their livelihood, and gradually reduce them to the level of, well, vermin, so that it doesn't hurt anyone when you destroy them. And so decent people were prepared to destroy these people, Jews. Decent people were conditioned to do it.
Unthinkable.
And it's happening today, of course, as well. I think of the horrible massacres in Bosnia, Herzegovina, in Kosovo, and think of Africa, where similar things are happening. Well, thank you very much indeed for bringing me here. I wouldn't have come without you, of course. I don't think I will again. I couldn't live here in Prague, you know.
Because?
too many ghosts, too many memories, too many dead people.
Our journey ends as it began, in England. Sir Nicholas Winton has a huge extended family now. When he asked me in 1988 to try and return his pictures and documents to the children he'd saved 50 years before, we traced as many as we could and introduced them to him in our programme.
Vera Diamont, now grown up and now called Vera Gissing. Vera Gissing is with us here tonight. Hello, Vera. And I should tell you that you are actually sitting next to Nicholas Winton.
Then, for the first time, she realised who had rescued them and that they were not alone anymore.
I think for all of us who didn't know of Nicky's existence, there was an incredible void in our history. And we needed to know how he came to be in the safety of England. And there were no parents to ask because our parents had perished in the Holocaust. And we were also bereft of family, bereft of our parents. Our children had no grandparents. You know, there was great emptiness. And finding Nicky, and as charismatic as he is, and as he sort of gradually warmed towards us and gradually began to realise how much he meant to us, he became sort of an honorary father and grandfather and...
great-grandfather.
And great-grandfather now, yes.
Now there's to be a memorial in Liverpool Street Station to the children themselves and to the courage of all those who helped to save them. The model is the granddaughter of one of Winton's children.
Hello. You my grandchild from 62 years ago? This is you, is it? Magnificent, isn't it? You pleased with it? Yes? And you're going to stand in Liverpool Street Station? Forever? You'll be able to look at this when you're a grandmother yourself, won't you? Looks like you, doesn't it? And you know what this represents? Your grandmother 62 years ago.
For help and more information on any issues raised in this programme, please contact the Association of Jewish Refugees on 020 7431 6161. That's 020 7431 6161.